Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Inside Out with Soumya. Today's conversation is going to be very helpful and enlightening for anyone who eats food, specifically for women and anyone who likes or loves and cares about women in their life or women in general. Why? Because we're going to be talking about the history of diet culture, including the origins of it and the different fads that came along the way. We'll also be discussing the diet cycle, how it can be a vicious circle that negatively impacts your physical and mental health. And towards the end, we'll be discussing an integrated approach to overcome this cycle using an intuitive eating model. What we're not going to discuss is what exactly to eat or not to eat to achieve an aesthetical or fitness goal. Instead, our focus will be on how to eat. And to have that conversation today, I am here with Emily Morrow. Hi, Emily.
Hi, Samya. Nice to be
So
here.
you. So good to have you. I'm going to introduce you real quick. And so,
Mhm.
Emily's pronouns are she and her. She is a holistic wellness coach and nutritionist by profession. She has a decade's worth of experience and expertise in helping people, primarily women, develop healthier relationship with food and their bodies, which is also the intention of this episode. She also has a podcast named Unstarved, dedicated to conversations about satiating one's body, mind, and soul. Do check it out right after you have listened to this conversation. I've had the pleasure of working alongside Emily and can say with utmost conviction that she is as skilled, intuitive, and compassionate a human as she is as a professional. Her work is especially intriguing as she taps not just into the physiological underpinnings of eating, but also the emotional, social, and cultural ones. Very, very important. So I am absolutely honored to have you today, Emily. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm a morning person, so I'm enjoying a nice slow morning. I'm enjoying the sunshine, hanging out with my dog, you know, just a nice mellow morning routine. And I love podcasting, so this is a great way to start the day as well.
Absolutely. I'm so happy. In fact, I myself am a morning person, so I like to go to bed early as well. But
Mhm.
tonight, right here, as we are in the night time, I just feel very awake and ready to have this conversation with you because I'm that excited to talk about all
Yay!
the things that we have planned for today.
Oh, good. Yes, I'm excited too. I can talk about this stuff for hours, so
I'm sure.
yeah.
And I'm glad that we have dedicated like a separate time to talk about this because I remember when we were working together, there were conversations here and there, but not specifically dedicated to this one.
Right, right. Yeah, that we get to really like dive into it today, so that's exciting.
Definitely.
Hmm.
Yes. And
Yeah.
thank you so much for making the time today to talk about such an important facet of mental health as well. It's
Hmm.
when we talk about mental health as a therapist, it's not a standalone career or profession. No, it's so
No.
many integrated professions. And today that we want to talk about, I'm glad to have a nutritionist, a professional one here to open up a lot of misconceptions, talk about the real aspects of how the body works, how it integrates with the mind, and how should we go about it actually.
Ah, yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's all connected, and how we do one thing is how we do most things. At least I believe that's true.
Yes,
So,
yes.
usually how our relationship to food, our relationship to our own body will mirror our relationships to many other things in life. So, I think it can be a very healing avenue for anybody to go down to address their relationship to food, for
Yeah,
sure.
wow, what a powerful way to start this conversation. So, the relationship with food will mirror the other relationships in life.
Hmm.
Interesting thought.
Yeah. Well, there's so much shame that comes
Mhm.
into our relationship with food. For so many people, every time we eat, it's almost like a little microdose of shame that we take because there's such an inundation of information about what we should be eating, what we shouldn't be eating, and it makes it very, very challenging for the average person to feel good about their meal choices because it doesn't you don't have to spend much time in the online wellness space to figure out that there's so much conflicting information, right?
So much. Oh my God. That is one of the
Yeah.
reasons why I'm so grateful to have you here today.
Yeah.
Emily, it's confusing, it's overwhelming to go out
Hmm.
there. And even when
Yeah.
you go to professionals, everyone has a different opinion. which is based on different schools of thoughts,
Right.
right? So
Absolutely.
what I'm most excited about today is because the model that you follow, the intuitive eating, it's less about what the world is saying. It's an integration of what is there outside the research, the studies, and listening to how your body receives it as well.
Absolutely. Yes, because one of the reasons why I think dieting fails us so profoundly is it creates a formula that's supposed to apparently work on every human body,
Oh my
but we're
God.
all unique. Not only is our physiology unique, our psychology is unique, our lifestyles, our culture,
Mhm.
we are unique, multifaceted beings, and to just apply one method of eating to everybody and then shame people for not wanting to do it or shame people for
Mhm.
failing that, model is a huge part of the problem, in my
Yeah, such
opinion.
strong
Mhm.
words. Even the initial few minutes of a conversation, shame, failure. Oh my God. That's a lot. And imagine something related to
Yeah,
such basic, like one of the most essential fuels that our body needs, like oxygen, we need food. And to
yeah.
be in such a complicated relationship with food, it can make life really tough for people.
Absolutely. And I think it's one of those things that we've normalized so much that
Mm-hmm.
most of us don't even sit to think about just how detrimental our relationship to food really is. We've internalized it as what's normal. And, you don't know what you don't know. Most of us never got the opportunity to have a healthy relationship with food, because from the time we're super little, we're usually being raised by people that are also caught up in the noise. And
Mm-hmm.
most parents are doing just their best with what they know, right? But inevitably, that intuitive approach to food gets kind of smashed out of us at a really young age. We're all naturally intuitive eaters, but we are kind of forcibly disconnected from those internal message cues from a really young age. And that's why I personally believe that wellness and truly being healthy is so much more about an unlearning than it is about learning more
I
information about
agree.
food.
A
Hmm.
100% on same page with you. That is something I keep telling my clients that even therapy, and now you're talking about even relationship with food, is more about
Hmm.
unlearning because only when you create the space for that can you imbibe new ideas, new ways of being. But you first have to take out what is not serving you anymore.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Oh God. You say that parents also play a very important role, right, in all of these things. And in
Hmm.
fact, I was reading a study. I might link it in the show notes because I don't exactly remember which one. It was about a group of girls, I think adolescent girls. And what they did was they studied their mothers' views around food, dieting, and all of that. And then assessed how the girls think about it. So the
Yeah.
mothers who had more restrictive approach to it, food or how things should be, the cultural norms associated. Even the girls, they started dieting at a very young age.
Yep. Yeah.
They had a lot of difficulty around body image issues. But the women
Hmm.
who were more free, for the lack of better words, who were more liberated in that way, that it's okay when we want to listen to our bodies and all of that. The girls, the daughters of those mothers, were also more secure in the way they looked and how their body is. Such an
Yeah.
important.
Absolutely. I mean, when we're children, we have our parents to model. It's our
Mhm.
parents that are telling us directly and indirectly how to exist on this planet. And even if, unfortunately, I think even if we had parents that maybe they didn't outwardly project their beliefs about food and the limitations on how they view their body onto their children, they still modeled it, right?
It
Children
trickles
witness
down.
these things and internalize them. Hmm.
Yeah, I feel like I'm talking to myself that these are the things I keep talking about so much. That, oh,
Mm,
parents, the modeling, the intuition, like the kids are so intuitive, even if you don't say things, they will pick up on how you're feeling or thinking, all that's happening. So there's
yeah.
absolutely no wall that you can put there when it comes to parent-child relationship.
No,
Yeah.
I don't think we give children nearly enough credit for knowing what they know. I think they
Yeah.
have a level of wisdom that we generally don't, a lot of adults generally don't
Yeah,
acknowledge. Hmm.
true. And the wisdom to like today in our conversation, it's a lot more to go back
Hmm.
to that wisdom, the innate wisdom. It's there inside of you. The conversation is to draw it out. That's it.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
And it's so funny we're talking about this today. So there's a friend's dog at my house today, and she did not eat her morning meal. We've got concerned that, oh, she's been here since 9 days. She's been eating full, quickly, quickly, quickly. She'll lick everything. But today she's not eating. And then we just
Mm.
realized that. as a dog, she's very intuitive. She knows what her
Yeah.
body needs at that point. And
Yeah.
as humans, I know that even when my tummy is not well, I'll be like, oh, eat more. All those conceptions that are there, you just need to stuff your tummy. But
Yeah.
she knows that she doesn't want food right now. Her body needs a
Uh-huh.
reset. And in the evening,
Yeah.
she was just completely fine. So that is the kind of wisdom that is already there inside.
It's so funny you bring that up because I just had the same aha moment with my own dog. Because
Oh,
she's not one of those dogs that will just sit down and eat a meal the second it's on the ground. She likes to graze. And
uh-huh.
I have been trying so hard to manipulate her to eat all in one go, where, I time it, where I put the food on the ground, and if she doesn't eat in 10 minutes, I take it away. She has to wait till the next feeding time. All the things that I've been reading online. And then I had this aha moment where I was like, here I am harping about intuitive eating and telling people to honor their hunger and fullness cues and to, heal their relationships to food. And I am projecting my own ideas of how my dog should eat onto her. And so
Uh-huh.
now, yeah, now I let her graze. It's all good. But yeah, because animals are very intuitive, and I've, in witnessing her patterns, there'll be some days where she eats quite a bit and then she'll like fast maybe for a whole day, and I'm not suggesting that humans do that necessarily, but just as an example is she regulates herself the way that she's supposed to for the
Mhm.
size of the dog that she is, and she's living into that intuition because lucky for our dogs, they're not inundated by diet culture the way we are.
They're not, yeah. That's what I'm saying. The projection is so much. They don't have the indoctrination that we do about
Right.
food. So it's basically my panic that, oh my God, why is she not eating? But she knows why she's not doing it. And it's a very, for the lack of better words, mindful decision that she's making at
Yeah.
that moment.
Yeah. Well, animals are more connected to their bodies. And I think
True.
that's really, as human beings, we tend to live very neck up. We're very cerebral. We are in analysis all the time, but we're not feeling very often. And as you know, as a therapist, we feel things through the body. That's where trauma is for. We feel all the sensations of life. And hunger and fullness are just two of them, you know?
I agree. Yeah, very
Yeah.
important. Animals as a part of nature, and nature is our biggest teacher. And
Hmm.
look at us, we
Absolutely.
just like two tiny moments, and it was such an opening for even us as
Hmm.
individuals. I'm glad to
Yeah.
hear that. And on
Yeah.
that point, as we've already started the discussion, I'm very happy with the way it's going. At the same time, there's this, as we're talking about food, eating,
Mhm.
relationship with it. We cannot let go of the word diet any time food comes up, eating
Yeah.
comes up,
Yeah.
right? And the moment the
Absolutely.
word diet comes up, I sense restriction,
Yeah.
exhaustion, so much. It's just too much. And restriction is the very primary word that comes to my mind. That, oh,
Yeah.
diet. What do you
Yeah.
think about that? That instant connection that our mind makes.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense because usually a diet is going to tell us, it's going to give some pretty rigid guidelines, either to what we're eating, how much we're eating, and now with intermittent fasting, when we're eating. So it's a restrictive model. It works by telling us what we shouldn't be doing and what we should be eliminating. And I believe that the antithesis to that, the anti-diet, is about nourishment. What do we need to do to nourish our bodies? What do we need to add into our life so that we are being fully nourished by what we're eating?
Yeah, I agree. The thing is, I guess I was reading somewhere, you tell me as a professional what it is.
Mhm.
But the word diet actually, as I was trying to trace the roots of the word, it comes from this Greek word which I made a note of. Yeah, it's called Diata, which means just mental and physical health. It's not supposed
Mhm.
to mean restriction. It's not
Right.
supposed to mean exhaustion. It's
Yeah.
not supposed to mean complication. But as of now, it just means that, oh, diet, I have to stop something or I have to put myself in a particular box, right? Even
Yeah.
there was a website that I read that has in nutritional term, diet just means the sum of food consumed by a person.
Hmm.
Yet the connotations attached to the food, the word diet in itself, oh my God, they're overwhelming.
Right. Right. Well, I think what you're speaking on is like the dictionary definition of diet versus
Yeah.
the marketing term that diet has been turned into.
Mhm.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's true, we don't really think of things in terms, when we use the word diet, I think it has become just like so enmeshed with that definition of restriction and it being usually for a specific outcome. Most often it's weight loss. So that's, yeah, and it is unfortunate because it has been hijacked. And it's interesting because, in the past, diet culture and the marketing around it is so sophisticated because they catch on. They catch on to the public's opinion about dieting. And there is way more awareness, I think, now. And so they start to adopt words like lifestyle. This isn't a diet, this is a lifestyle, which is a painfully vague and meaningless thing to say because at the end of the day, a lifestyle that promotes restriction or suggests that you need the messaging of that lifestyle to know what's best for you is the same exact thing. Whether you call it a diet or a lifestyle, it's irrelevant.
True, I
It's not.
agree. There's just smart ways
Mhm.
of marketing it, like triggering people or evoking some sort of emotion and getting to sell what they're selling, a service, a product, anything that might be.
Exactly. Yeah. It's
It's
a
so fun.
multi-billion dollar industry.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
In fact, now that we're at this, what are these industries that benefit out of this diet culture that has been created?
Oh my gosh. Supplement companies.
Mhm.
Um, I think just, personal practitioners who sell their own diets, sell their own lifestyle plans. Um, Gosh, I mean, you could expand it to be so many things, like designer brands even that really, refuse to sell inclusive sizing. So it promotes people to like go on restrictive diets in order to fit those
Yeah.
clothing as a
Yeah.
status symbol. Um, Honestly, Samia, it's endless. I think, food companies, one of the things I talk about all the time is that superfood is a marketing term. It's not there's no,
Mhm.
there is no, like nutritional qualifier to call something a superfood. It's purely a marketing term. So food companies, they can, kind of slap on that superfood label on a food, put it in some greenwash packaging to make it look really eco-friendly and green, and charge an incredible markup because they're suggesting that that food is something that provides some sort of nutritional profile that is unique to that food and there's no other way you can get that nutrition. So that's a really big way, which most of the time is not true. If you were to compare superfoods, broccoli is
Uh-huh.
just as nutritionally dense as, and even more so than some of these superfoods on the market that claim to just be, the solution to our health and the secret pill. So it really it spans so far and it has like tendrils that go into so many different areas and, big and small ways.
I was about to buy spirulina, if that's how it's pronounced.
Hmm.
I was like, oh, it's a superfood. I'm not even someone who watches a lot of television or a lot of that, right? But
Hmm.
somehow from media, it got registered in my mind that it's a superfood. It's
Hmm.
something that will cure a lot of ailments, so to say. But now that I'm
Yeah.
hearing you, it's a marketing gimmick, just another marketing gimmick to make more money.
Yeah, and it's not to say that the foods that are labeled as superfoods are things that you should avoid or that there's no value in them. But as
Mhm.
consumers, it's important to know that the label of superfood, it doesn't have any nutritional like qualifiers to be given that. It's purely a marketing term. So yeah, there's definitely benefits to spirulina. It's a great source of vegan protein, for people if they choose to use it. But it's not to say that it's like, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a food that is untouchable, that there's like nothing else that can, support that. And the issue with superfoods as well, and like kind of the promotion of it, is it kind of gentrifies nutrition because a lot of the times those foods are more expensive than other groceries. And, it can make people feel like they don't have the income bracket to be healthy. And that's where I feel like it can be problematic as well
Mhm.
because there are
Right.
a lot of more, there are a lot of like more affordable grocery items that are more than adequate enough to help us meet our nutritional needs. And
Mhm.
if we are being told all the time that we need these superfoods and these supplements in order to be healthy, it can be extremely disempowering for people that might not have the income or the spare money to spend on those foods, right?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay, let's compare some superfoods. Just
Hmm.
as you name certain superfoods which are expensive, highly marketed these days, and a
Hmm.
common sort of not a substitute, but a parallel that you can draw in a daily life for that food
Yeah.
itself.
Yeah. Let's see. It's, it's hard because I don't really shop for superfood specifically anymore. Um, I like the one that I'm thinking of is like an acai berry. Are you
Mm-hmm.
familiar with those? So yeah,
No.
it's a great berry. Berries in general are very nutritionally dense, but they are actually you can get the same benefits from eating blackberries, raspberries, blueberries, right? Which are
Okay.
so readily available, at least in the United States where I am. They're readily available. You can buy them frozen. If you go to like my local supermarket, my local like more kind of health food, like a Whole Foods, a bag of blueberries is going to be significantly cheaper than a bag of frozen acai, but
Mhm.
nutritionally they're very, very comparable. And so that's one example. I like to tell people too is like if you don't like quinoa, you don't have to eat quinoa. And quinoa is a wonderful, it's wonderful because it's a whole protein. So for people who are vegetarian or vegan, it's a great grain because it does provide all of the amino acids that we need from our proteins. But there's other ways to get those as well. You can do rice and beans. You don't have to spend money on these sort of inflated costs of certain things because they've been labeled as a superfood.
Yeah. In India, we
Mhm.
have a lot of millets
Mhm.
locally sourced, and I've heard that even like quinoa, it's a local thing. So of course, it's more beneficial. It's going into
Right.
terrain here, and it's
Yeah.
much cheaper, Emily. Much cheaper. Like I love quinoa, but I know that okay, I'll have to set a budget aside if I'm
Right,
buying.
right.
If I'm eating as much quinoa as I'm eating rice or other millets.
hmm Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and the cost is one thing, and also too, I think it's important for people to know that if they don't like a specific food, they don't have to force themselves to eat it because there's always going to be something out there that they will probably enjoy more that is going to match the nutrition that that food would have brought them.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
we diet culture has taught us to think of things in such extremes, right? Where there's just certain foods that are really, really good that we need to eat so much of, and other foods we need to completely avoid. But in reality, like every food has such a unique combination of macronutrients, micronutrients, phytonutrients that can, help us in unique ways. It's not as binary as that, as like good
Mm-hmm.
and bad. And really, it's just about variety. The trick to really being fully nourished and making sure that we're getting our nutritional needs is just to have variety in our diet. You know, you can make the most healthy, quinoa bowl, right? With black beans and bell peppers. But if you only ate that every single day for your entire life, there is a lot of nutrition you'd be missing out on from other foods.
One thing that I notice in my body is that if I don't enjoy the food, no matter how healthy, how many superfoods are in there,
hmm
I don't feel as nourished. And by nourished, I mean my gut, how it responds, my
Yeah.
ablutions, my sleep. I see it in all of that. But the more
Yeah.
I eat the foods that I enjoy, that taste good to me, like I like juicy, soft, moist foods, my body responds really well to me. I am more
hmm
clear minded, clear headed. I'm able to
Yeah.
sleep well. All of those things happen. And in
Yeah.
fact, as you're saying this, I'm thinking that if say someone is giving me a acai berry and there is another Indian version of it, say Indian gooseberry, we call it amla here. So
hmm
if someone has marketed that acai berry so much and I'm not getting it, but I only get this Indian gooseberry, I might not enjoy the gooseberry as much. And we of course know that a big part of nutrient absorption is how we feel, how we think about that
hmm
food. So
Yes.
it actually restricts it, right?
hmm Absolutely. And I think you're also touching on what's called the satisfaction factor of food. So when we are enjoying our food, when we're eating something that, we don't feel restricted, we actually genuinely enjoy it, it ups what's called the satisfaction factor. And the satisfaction factor is the very thing that keeps us from you know, binge eating and feeling like we need more. It actually helps us to honor our fullness and hunger cues more because
Mhm.
we need to feel satisfied by our food psychologically for our body to feel satisfied with the meal that it just received.
that is there some system behind it? Because I know it as a concept, but
Mhm.
not as a theory or the science of it. If you could talk more about that.
Yeah, so when we feel deprived while we're eating, whether it's because we are on a diet and we're trying to kind of force feed ourselves foods that we don't enjoy, or we're not eating enough food because we're on a calorie restrictive diet and we feel hungry, the body has a very intelligent way of responding to that. And it's basically what it does is it triggers a state of deprivation in the body.
Hmm.
So what happens is the body responds by formulating a very specific set of cocktails, a specific cocktail of hormones that cause us to need to overcompensate for what it perceived to be a lack. So it sees a lack of satisfaction in food as famine. It sees a lack of food as famine, even if we're doing it on purpose. And here's the thing is like the body couldn't care less if we are carrying more
I
body
like.
fat. It couldn't care less if we want to lose weight. It couldn't care less if we have more body fat on us than we see as acceptable or what society sees as acceptable. Body fat is survival.
Mm.
It's a source of energy that's stored on us. So when we purposely restrict calories or when we are forcing ourselves to eat foods that we don't enjoy, it triggers those deprivation signals that can cause us to overeat and overcompensate. And this is why 96% of people gain back all the weight they lose after dieting.
Wow. So even
Mhm.
though I'm eating a full bowl of all the healthy things that is required, so-called for my BMI,
Mhm.
all of that, I can
Yeah,
still feel hungry and deprived because I'm not satisfied with the food.
absolutely. Yeah,
Oh.
psychological deprivation and physical deprivation are registered in exactly the same way by the body. So whether we are
Oh.
physically deprived because we're not eating enough calories, we're not eating enough macronutrients, or we're psychologically deprived because we're on a diet and we're craving pizza and we've been telling ourselves, I'm not allowed to have this. It doesn't matter. The body sees it exactly the same way. It sees it as a scarcity of food and it responds in the same way. And this is why being satisfied with our meals is so, so important so that we don't trigger that deprivation cocktail that causes us to, well, it lowers our metabolism as well, but it also triggers us to want to eat more and
Mhm.
it stops us from feeling full as soon as we used to feel.
That blew my mind. That is such a simple thing that you said, just two statements, and now a lot of
Mhm.
things make sense.
Yeah.
I am not particularly, at least in the last couple of years, I'm not in for dieting at all. I've been focusing more on my body, all of that. But before that, I was a part of it. I
Mhm.
haven't exactly dieted, but when I did that, oh, I'll eat salads, or it's just influenced by different cultures and all. I knew I'm eating a lot, like a good portion, and yet I would crave things. Like I know I'm
Mhm.
full, but I would crave that cookie, that chocolate, that ice cream, or pizza for that matter. And now I
Mhm.
know why.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's why I tell people that all foods can exist in a healthy diet. And it is so much better for us to honor our cravings in real time, and enjoy a cookie after, a fully nutritionally balanced meal than it is to deny ourselves that cookie for a week, 2 weeks at a time. And then finally we have to give in to that cocktail of hormones that's in our bodies because the willpower is a depleting and limited resource. We can only fight against that for so long. And that's usually when we end up driving to the store, buying a pack of cookies and eating the whole thing in complete self-abandon. And we look at this empty thing of cookies and think, did I just eat this whole thing? We're not present with it. It's just a complete out of control binge. And so many people who are on the diet cycle struggle with binge eating for this exact reason.
Yeah, because our bodies are feeling deprived.
Yeah. And typically, when we do give in to those deprivation signals, we're going to binge on the foods that we've been denying ourselves. And for a
Mm.
lot of people, that's going to be very sugary, starchy foods, which aren't bad foods if we eat them in moderation, like integrated into a lifestyle. But when we're binging them all in one go, it usually leaves people feeling pretty unwell, and also the mental health toll that it takes because we then feel like failures. We feel
Mm.
like we have no willpower. We feel like we failed ourselves, and it triggers that shame again. But we don't realize that it's actually the diet that failed us. We were doing something that's not possible.
Agreed. I have a lot of clients
Hmm.
coming who presented body image issues.
Yeah.
They have such a difficult time, I believe. This cycle keeps going on.
Yeah.
They eat so-called healthy, and then the
Hmm.
snacking begins, then the guilt begins, shame
Yeah.
begins, and then
Yeah.
the cycle just keeps repeating. It's
Hmm.
very difficult for them, and indeed, a big part of big mental health impact that the diet culture has had is on body image issues. There's, of course,
Absolutely.
most people, I don't think anyone is spared from body image issues that is resulting from the diet culture, but I'd say
Hmm.
women, for sure, the gender norms, the
Yeah.
history that we've had in terms of societal expectations,
Hmm.
we are mostly very, very much affected, the beauty standards. There's also adolescence. If we talk about age group, there's such an influential year of life. We want to fit in, we want to be a part of the group, the media, what is cool, and mostly what's cool is the beauty standard that is going on.
Yep.
Yeah. Even,
Absolutely.
yeah, even people of color, there's such less representation in media.
Hmm.
There's a lot of body image issue that people of color go through, or
Yeah.
LGBTQIA plus community, because of the gender norms that are there. So much
Absolutely.
going on, so much going on for these specific groups.
Yes. There's so many layers and there's so much complexity behind it. And as
Mm-hmm.
you said, nobody is spared. Nobody is
Mm-hmm.
spared because the beauty standard is so narrow and it's so rigid. And the truth is that even the examples we see of this body image being represented aren't even living up to that standard because these photos are photoshopped, they are altered. So even the images that we're looking to as representations of the perfect match to this ideal beauty standard aren't a perfect match to the ideal beauty standard.
I agree. There are a lot of
Mhm.
American shows, British shows, which have Indian representation now. And I just look at them like, oh my God, they're so beautiful. I look nothing like them. Imagine.
Mm,
So there is a representation, and yet there is a tight, not restriction, but a tight compliance
right.
within the beauty standards of that culture
Mhm.
as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of fat phobia in the United
Mm,
States, I'm speaking just for the United States. I can't confidently speak on the rest of the world, but I would imagine it mimics it. A lot of fat phobia has racist origins.
mm-hmm.
So, it's very complex. There's so many ways that we could, unravel this. But
Yeah.
yeah, it is very detrimental. And I think the really tough thing about what I do is, when I'm talking to people about how to heal their relationship to food and heal their relationship to their bodies, and I tell people, like, I don't ethically, and I cannot guarantee that you'll lose weight by having a more intuitive approach to food. Because just having that as a goal automatically separates us from eating intuitively. So, which is a
Completely.
tough sell, because most people do want to lose weight, and I don't harp them for that at all. I still have to check myself. I'm still very much inundated in this culture, and I'm still doing my own work on it. It's extremely difficult to completely disconnect from wanting to sort of go down that path. And so I don't blame people at all for wanting to lose weight. But I truly believe that the only way that we can actually have a healthy relationship to food is by eating for the sake of nourishment and eating for the sake of having a healthy relationship to food and having balance. And then trusting that our body's body weight is going to fall where it's meant to be. And then we have to do the work to accept wherever that lands. And that's what
Mhm.
gets really tough.
It is. I can imagine how difficult it is for you to sometimes sustain clients because the focus of a lot of people is on weight loss.
Hmm.
I actually wonder that how come when diet is such a holistic word in itself, everything reduced to just weight?
Hmm.
How?
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah.
100% of my clients with body image issues, I mean, they 100% are concerned about their weight.
Hmm.
There
Yeah.
are additional layers, maybe skin color. Skin color is huge in India. So that
Hmm.
is there, or certain
Yeah.
features. But weight, without weight, every person that I see, they're
Yeah.
concerned about.
Yeah. I kind of want to tap into what you were saying earlier about like how it might be hard for me to retain clients, right? If I'm not promising weight loss. But this is the really cool thing, and it's one of the things that gives me a lot of optimism and hope is that I still take on people who say they want to lose weight. But I'll just
Mm.
say to them like that won't be the focus. I can't tell you not to have that goal, but our focus is going to be healing your relationship to food, and
Mhm.
your body weight will change in the way it's meant to based on what your body dictates to be right for
Yeah.
itself, right? And the people that stick around, what's really interesting is that once we start doing that work and they heal their relationship to food as well as to exercise, moving for the sake of, because we're human beings and we're designed to move, but not with this rigid sort of, really intense, intentions behind it. They realize for the first time how beneficial it is to just have those things. And naturally, their body weight becomes like, they're like, oh yeah, whatever, like that. Yeah, it'd be nice to lose a few pounds, but this is so much better. Like I feel so much better about myself. I feel so much more energized. And that's what I like to focus on is like, there's, talking about weight loss, right? That's the only thing we think about in regards to health. When we eat well, when we're eating a varied diet, and we are allowing ourselves to indulge in the things we enjoy in a way without where we're not binging on them, we feel amazing. We're sleeping better. We have more energy. And typically, we also tend to feel more confident in our bodies, even if our bodies are still not meeting a certain standard that maybe we wanted for it before. It's really easy to obsess about that standard when our relationship to food is so disordered that we're hyper focusing on that as the only benefit that can come from being a healthy person and adopting healthy habits.
Yeah.
But once we do that, we start to see that there's actually the benefits, there's benefits that go so far beyond weight loss. And that's
Way,
really
way.
where I get really excited for my clients when they finally see that for themselves, because you don't know what you don't know. And if you've never
Yeah.
experienced that, you would think that the only benefit you can get from eating healthy and exercising is weight loss.
Yeah, that's what we've been told.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
absolutely. The people who stick, I'm sure they experience something much more. It's the mental health parallel of it that I tell people is that when people say, I want to feel happy, I'm like, I'm sorry. You, I won't tell you that please you don't have to feel happy or you can't have that goal. But at the same time, that is not what my intention is because other emotions are present. It's more about
Yeah.
integrating, listening to your body. And there's so many intricate similarities that I'm hearing from you in nutrition as well. It's
Yeah.
you keep your goal. And I keep
Mm-hmm.
my own perspective and let's see how we can bring it together and knit a nice um scarf or whatever that comes out
Yeah.
of.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, it makes sense that it would mirror because, it's mental health and how we view food. It's honestly, it's one and the same.
they are. They
Hmm.
absolutely are.
Yeah.
As we're talking about weight, I'm recollecting some of the statements that my clients have made, and they break my heart.
Mm.
I have literally heard clients come up and say that my periods haven't come for like months. I'm not eating. I am not sleeping.
Hmm.
I'm having a lot of issues, but I'm happy because now I'm thin.
Yeah. It's awful.
People, it's awful. People have come up and said that I am depressed, but now my friends, my family are happy because I've
Yeah.
lost weight.
Yeah.
Another client said that I wish I have the kind of depression or mental health disorder where I don't eat and lose weight.
Hmm.
That is the intensity. I don't think that the impact of diet culture, we look at it as seriously, but when I hear these clients, it breaks me. It's
Yeah.
devastating to hear these things.
It is heartbreaking. And it's unfortunately so common, you know.
So common. Like every other, especially women, every other women I hear these days.
Yeah. And I mean, just speaking on, when we lose our cycle from because our body fat has dropped so low or we're malnourished, it says a lot about just how the misogyny behind diet culture, where
Mm,
literally like your worth as a woman is so purely aesthetic that it is like recommended that you give up this like core facet of our system, of how our bodies function.
Yeah.
You know,
It makes
it's
me angry. It makes me
yeah,
really angry.
absolutely. Yeah. Um, yeah, it's awful. And I like to tell people there is no better way to stick it to the patriarchy than to refuse to diet.
Yeah, it's so complicated, Emily.
Hmm.
As a human in these sessions, when I hear these statements, this is exactly what I want to say. As a therapist, I know I can't say it, but the human
Yeah.
in me, I just want to go and give these women a hug and say that you do you. And I'm so sorry you had to take the BS of all of these people, the cultures, the oppression that has been going on. And I'm a
Yeah.
part of it. Who am I to say that I'm not a part of it? A lot of times,
Absolutely.
I, as an individual, my body shape has been pretty constant. So I do fit into that. Okay, I'm a thin, lean, curvy sort of a person.
Hmm.
But if very unconsciously, if I start to see some belly fat coming in, I'm like, oh my God, I'll have to remind myself that it's okay. Are you
Yeah.
feeling good? I have to remind myself to check in with my body, how it's feeling at the moment, instead of just looking at the cover of the book. But it's
Yeah.
very, very hard. And I'm talking, I'm a typically thin person. How
Yeah.
difficult it is for people who do not fall into the prototype, the in
Hmm.
quotes prototype.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you like we really have to just like completely silence out the noise. It takes so much like personal will to
Mhm.
overcome that. And but it is
Wow.
possible, you know, and people do it, and it's important to know that it is possible. It doesn't mean I don't believe that we're ever 100% healed, but I do believe
Mhm.
that there's a ton of room for healing between where somebody might be now and how they see their body and the perfectly healed version of them, you know.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it can be hard to strive for healing because we want that perfectly healed version, but that perfectly healed version feels
Yeah.
impossible. So it almost feels like why even bother? You know,
Mhm.
I know I'm never going to feel just like completely 100% confident in my body, but there's so much room in between that as well. That's
Yeah.
worth striving for, right?
For sure. I can personally
Yeah.
advocate for it. There, I haven't seen a perfection as of now, and I don't think I ever will. But I know how
No.
far I have come in my personal journey. I know how far my friends have come, how far my clients have come. And that is
Yeah.
much better from where I was. And I know I'm going to keep getting better. It gives me
Yep.
hope.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's really all I want people to have is just hope that they can have a different experience, you know.
Yeah, true.
Hmm. Yeah.
Now that we're talking about this, the diets, how did this start? I am always very curious that how did this, what we're talking about, start coming into being? It's not like
Uh,
one day someone woke up and said, yeah, let's diet. It isn't really systematic.
yeah.
Systematic.
You know, it goes back really far into history, to be honest. But what's funny is that it only has targeted women in the past like couple hundred years or so. For a long time, it was actually men that would predominantly diet for weight loss. It was not something that women were seen to do. And that's because for a long time, you know, body fat was seen as a sign of wealth, as a sign of fertility. It was attractive. So a woman would
Mhm.
never purposely try to lose weight. If anything, it'd be the opposite. And, you know, it wasn't until I listened to this like really fascinating podcast about this recently, and I'm sorry I can't remember the name. I'll try and find it for you. But they talked about how in the Industrial Revolution in the United States, so when we went from being a farming economy, you know, where people and we moved into the factories. And before that, women used to have their dresses custom made to them. There was no standard sizing.
I love that. I
Yeah.
absolutely love that.
Yeah. So, you know, they would get their dresses custom made for them. So there was no sense of feeling like they were supposed to fit into a certain thing. It just didn't exist. But when the Industrial Revolution happened, they started to have dresses that were sold on the rack, and so they would come in sizes. And that was one of the first times that women, at least in the Western world, had the feeling of, oh, there's a different size that I could be other than what I am. And so,
Wow.
you know, there's so many ways that like dieting took place from then on. But it's I actually have one of my favorite things to collect when I go like antiquing are old recipe books and old diet books because I find them so fascinating. And I have one from the 1950s that was made by a sugar company. That's the sugar diet. And it literally breaks down a 1,200 calorie diet, and it like breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And everyone includes a teaspoon of this specific brand of sugar, black coffee, half of a grapefruit, extremely rigid, and that was the
Wow.
mid-century, the 1950s. And, it kind of just went off from there. We can talk about the specific diets that have happened since, but,
Yeah.
long I guess my short answer is that it's been around for a long time to some degree or another. Humans have been wanting to change their bodies for a long time. There's always been some kind of beauty standard, even if it doesn't match what we have now, and it goes back pretty far.
Interesting you talk about the book because while I was researching for this conversation, I read that the first book on dieting was
Hmm.
written in the 15th century.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what I read, please correct me here because you are the expert in this area. It was by an Italian nobleman called Luigi Cornaro. And the
Mm.
first diet book was named Discourses on the Sober Life, The Art of Living Long.
Yeah,
And this
it sounds pretty good, huh? It
sounds so
doesn't sound like a diet. Hmm.
it doesn't actually. And apparently, this man went on to live for 100, 102 years. So you can actually believe him that, okay, he's living a pretty long life. And though
Yeah.
I agree how some parts of it are still imbibed in the cultures today, as in eating in moderation, portion
Hmm.
control, all of that, some good parts that people in the industry has. I don't know. I don't want to call it good. I mean, you tell me that people have picked up. But there were certain things that it pointed out that this book was there were three factors. One, it obsessed with extreme moderation, like obsessive moderation. You cannot go beyond this. And therefore, it was
Mm.
highly, highly restrictive. This is what you can eat. This is when you can eat it.
Yeah.
And if you can't eat this, you can't eat it. Along with that, the emphasis was more on quantity rather than quality. And this is
Yep.
the 15th century. If these are the three
Yeah.
things that it didn't do well, I'm like, it's okay. We can let him get away with it. People
Honestly,
still
I feel like somebody could rewrite that book in like modern English terms and sell it and probably make $1 billion.
imagine
Hmm.
15th century to now still applicable.
Yeah,
Imagine how far we have come and yet not at all.
exactly. Yeah, still with the restriction. Yeah, it's a tale as old as time. And as far as specific diets that I think a lot of your listeners might recall or at least be aware of because their parents fell into it, we've seen low carb. Low carb is sort of, what we're doing now. In the 70s, 80s, and 90s, dietary fat was the enemy. Everything was low fat or fat free. We had fat-free potato chips, fat-free sour cream, fat-free cheese. And that was the gold standard, just getting your dietary fat as low as possible, which is terrible
Yeah.
because we need dietary fat for so many functions of the body, predominantly brain health, hormonal health. It really did a number. And if anything is going to cue our body's deprivation signals, it's going to be not eating dietary fat because it is
Mhm.
such a, it's such a strong source of energy for the body. And now we're dealing with low carb, and that's something that I fell into during my 20s for sure. I've done every diet under the sun. I did not get here as somebody who's always been that. I have not always been this well on this side of things. And now we have intermittent fasting. Where we're told to only eat within certain windows, and that we have to fast during other windows. So it's always diet culture kind of picks its angle and it presents it as something new, but it's really the same old thing based on
Yeah.
restriction. And it does a lot of harm in a lot of ways.
I'm sure it
Mhm.
does. This goes way back, like 15th century, but like you said, the Industrial Revolution, so the past decades,
Yeah.
couple of decades.
Hmm.
What are some common diet fads that came in and might still exist? And
Yeah.
please talk to me about the positive, if any, and the negative impacts of that physically, mentally.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I think some of the biggest fads in recent history were the low fat fad. So dietary fat, keeping it extremely low. I'll be honest with you, I'm hard pressed to think of positives for any of these, but I'll do my best.
Okay, I just opened that door like in case there
Yeah.
are any.
Yeah,
But
no,
sure.
it's a completely fair question. So the low fat craze really that I feel like that really kind of penetrated the psyche of so many people. I've worked
It
with
still
women.
does. It still does. I have so many products that like
Yeah.
low fat butter, low fat milk, so many people
Hmm.
opting for that.
Yeah.
And as you were saying, I'm just thinking, a positive that might be, please tell me, today's sedentary lifestyle, there's not a lot of movement to burn off a lot of things. I'm not saying that go for
Hmm.
zero fat, but
Yeah.
maybe if someone opts for certain products that are low fat, will that be okay?
See, I don't want to tell anybody that a food is wrong, right?
Yeah, yeah.
The issue with going with something that is where you're purposely trying to like minimize a specific like macronutrient, and our macronutrients are going to be proteins, carbohydrates, and fats.
Mhm.
Those are the three nutrients that provide energy to the body, right, in the form of calories and different, and they each perform unique functions. I think the issue is not so much physical. Sometimes it's a psychological thing, right?
Mhm.
So it kind of fosters a fear of these things. And I'll speak on that because, I've worked with a lot of women who, and I think especially women who are, older women, 50s, 60s plus, where they
Mhm.
really lived the majority of their like really developmental years, early adulthood during this specific era of like fat is bad. Trying to educate them on adding in healthy fats into their diet is extremely difficult. There's so much fear. There's a fear of olive oil, there's a fear of salad dressings, of high quality butter and ghee, like a true fear of these foods. And I also think the name being fat doesn't help
Mhm.
because we
Oh,
associate, we're
you
like,
always
well, if
say.
I eat fat, I will be fat, right? So, it's that fear. Um, I would say like as if we were going to find a positive, and I think it's more, this is a positive not so much on like specific trends, but just on the time that we're in, is that we have more access to information than we ever have before. And I think that diet culture is sort of like a byproduct of the access of information that we have. Like we have more diets coming at us all the time, but we
Mhm.
also have more power as a consumer than we've ever had before as access to information. So I know that kind of dodges your question a little bit, but that's my way of like finding a
No,
positive.
I got it as a pretty cool answer to my question that yes, we do have more information and therefore more power
Hmm.
as a consumer to make certain choices.
Yeah.
And also just circling back to the low fat, these
Hmm.
low fat products are also more processed, right?
Yeah, typically, right? Especially when we're talking about a food that naturally contains dietary fat, like cheese, sour
Mm-hmm.
cream, you know, potato chips. There was back in the 90s and early 2000s, there was a brand of potato chips that came out with a fat-free oil
Mm-hmm.
that caused a lot of digestive upset, and it became kind of a joke because they would say like, don't eat too much of it because you're going to spend the rest of your day in the bathroom. And it's these alternatives are not good for us. They weren't good for us then, they're not good for us now. um,
Yeah.
so they are more processed. Anytime we take a food and we manipulate it to have a different macronutrient profile than it naturally has, it's going to be more processed. And this isn't to demonize processed foods. For a lot of people, processed foods play a role in having a varied diet because unfortunately there's so many places in the world that are food deserts, and they only have access to frozen foods and processed foods. So I
Yeah.
don't like to demonize them because I think they can play a role depending on who we are. But that's to say, when we're purposely seeking out foods that have like, low carb, like a low carb cereal, cereal naturally has carbohydrates, or a low fat sour cream, it's going to be more processed. So I would usually suggest to, you know, just go for the original product because everything can work in a well balanced
Yeah.
diet. And also when we eat low fat, it triggers our body's deprivation signals quite a bit because
Mm-hmm.
fat is very satiating. Dietary fat helps us to feel more satisfied. It makes food actually taste better. That's sort of the value of it in cooking. So if we are avoiding all fat, I mean, that is like the driest, most bland meal, you know?
I cannot even think about it. I mean, I do not
No,
like foods. I can't imagine how
no.
people used to eat without adding fats, oils, all of these things to their diet.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I've coached women who, they come to me and they're like, I don't know why I can't lose weight. Every day at lunch I just have a salad with no dressing and chicken breast, which has no fat and it's just pure protein.
Mm.
Super dry. I don't do the croutons, and then they tell me, what they eat in the evening. It's just very dry, very bland food. And, I'll ask them, I'm like, are you enjoying what you're eating? And it's so interesting because half the time they haven't even asked themselves that question. And they have to
Mm.
think about it. And they're like, and the enjoyment of food has been so deprioritized compared to like what they think the food is going to get them as far as outcome on their weight, that they've just disconnected from whether they're even enjoying or not.
Such a simple question. It can open so
Hmm.
many doors.
Yeah. So it's really valuable when they actually do ask themselves that question for the first time, and then they're like, actually, like, no, I don't.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
Talking about fat, even now, don't hold me for this. I'm just, I don't know, I'm not a doctor.
No, it's
So,
okay.
brain is 90% fat.
I'm sorry, what is that?
The brain, the human brain is 90% fat, right?
Honestly, I can't confirm that either way, but I do know that the brain does heavily rely on fat, dietary fat, healthy fats. Hmm.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
okay, so I'm maybe not gonna talk more about that, but probably I
Yeah.
will research on it. I have heard a lot of people talk about that. That
Hmm.
fat is very important for the brain, very, very important.
Absolutely. As well as hormone production and regulation as well. A lot of our hormones are synthesized using healthy fats. So we need, and our hormones control almost every function of the body, especially for women. Like when women go low fat or low carb, it really, really takes a toll on our hormonal function. Big time.
Low carb and low fat. All right.
Hmm. Hmm. I
So
mean, low
talking,
protein would also be an issue, but those are the
yeah,
two macronutrients that are
yeah,
most commonly, women are cutting. So,
yeah,
yeah.
mostly either fat or carbs because that is what is associated with weight gain. So all of that.
Exactly. Yeah. I have yet to see protein be demonized by diet culture. I'm waiting for the day. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah. Let's see. But so that
Yeah.
is one thing. There was a big fat of no fat, low fat, low fat, low fat sort of a
Hmm.
fat going on. There's also you said no or low carb, which is
Yes.
I'm not sure. Keto is something on the same line.
Yeah, so keto is probably the most common way that people go low carb. It's I think they're interchangeable as far as terms. Keto and low carb, same thing. And essentially what people do is they cut their carbohydrates very low, often to like 20 grams or less per day. And really
Mhm.
for the average person, they need to eat anywhere between like 150 and 300 grams of
Oh
carbohydrates
my
every
God,
day.
from
So
150 to 20.
yeah. And and also that can change too, depending on how physically active we are. Carbohydrates are what fuel our muscles for exercise. So, usually we'd want to eat more before we go on a good run. We need these things to fuel our muscles and to give us energy. And our brain also relies on carbohydrates as it's its primary fuel source. So,
Mm-hmm.
when we go ketogenic, essentially what happens, so the theory behind the ketogenic diet is that you go so low carb that your body is forced to transition into using what's called ketones instead of glucose as its primary fuel source. And in
Okay.
the and in the process of converting, I know this is really sciencey, but in the process of our bodies producing ketones as a result of it not getting enough carbohydrates, we tend to burn up a lot of water. That process requires a lot of water. So
Uh-huh.
people get hooked on the ketogenic diet because they lose an incredible amount of water weight very quickly.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that's usually what gets people really hooked on it. But the thing is that being in a state of ketosis is not the body's primary state. And it's a state of emergency. It's not something that it shouldn't be something that we're in all the time. Back when we were living in caves and, hunting and gathering our own food, the ketogenic process was helpful because if we were experiencing famine, our bodies could go into ketosis and we would still be able to function. We'd still be able to have the energy to collect food. But it was never meant to be a permanent thing. It was always, it's a human body's way of survival when we're experiencing famine.
So basically, our bodies were technically, by going on the keto diet, we're deliberately
Mhm.
putting our bodies in a state of shock.
Yeah, definitely. And what's interesting is that we used to, they say that the brain can function off ketones like it can with glucose. But they've actually just discovered there's a part of the brain that actually does not run on ketones. It still needs carbohydrates. So it really, at the end of the day, like I don't recommend it. And I will say I did keto for a long time. So I'm not innocent in this. I'm not judging anybody because it's so common now, and it's being, I think it's one of those diets that's being promoted as to be seen as like really healthy and like a complete lifestyle adjustment that someone can maintain for the rest of their lives. But we're now finding that it's actually, we do need carbohydrates. And I will say that for me, when I stopped doing it, my sleep improved, my energy levels improved, and my mental health improved. Because it turns
Mhm.
out we do in fact need carbohydrates. So,
Wow.
yeah.
What are the long-term impacts of going on a keto diet?
Well, just like with any diet, it cues our body into a deprivation. So typically what happens is that we sometimes will end up, depending on the person, right? Most of us really like carbohydrates. Most of us enjoy sugars and things like that. And so inevitably, for a lot of people, these diets aren't sustainable. They're not really interested in doing this for the rest of their lives. And so what ends up happening is as soon as they start to eat carbohydrates again, and their body shifts back into being primarily glucose burning, which is the it's what the body turns carbohydrates into glucose as a form of energy. Once it converts back, people end up gaining the weight back, just like with any diet. In fact,
Yeah.
statistics say 96% of people gain the weight back after dieting. So
96.
dieting only works for 4% of the population, if that.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping these 4% people are healthy in a way, because I also
Hmm.
read that people who did keto for a really long time also had a higher chance of having heart attacks, like other
Yeah.
cardiac issues.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, it's the world of keto is very strange because there's people that call themselves dirty keto, and then there's people that call themselves clean keto, basically meaning that if you're clean keto, you eat a very clean diet, lots of vegetables, you're just not eating carbohydrates. And then there's dirty keto, where it's like they're wrapping cheese around bacon, and eating, just steak and eggs. And yeah, of course, like those people are probably going to struggle with some long-term effects on their health,
Yeah,
you
I'm
know.
sure.
And that it's funny because when we say, like, as I say these things out loud, if in some circles the amount of hate that is would be directed towards me for saying this is like profound,
Mhm.
you know? And that's the thing about diets too, is that for so many people when they're locked into them, there's a lot of like defensiveness around it, you know?
Yeah.
And, even just, people, and this is where I just get really like, let me like collect my thoughts a little bit on this one. Because like as somebody who's really promoting like not being on a diet, it's a interesting space to find myself in like terms of marketing, because
Hmm.
especially on social media, because most people are promoting keto, or now there's even carnivore, which is like a subset of keto, which basically means you only eat meat, no vegetables. In its most extreme sense, they don't even eat spices. So there's a lot of extremism in diet culture
Hmm.
as well.
Yeah.
So,
There's this series called Parks and Recreation. Have you watched that? I
yes.
just got reminded of Ron when you said carnivore.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. It's like
Such a
Ron
familiar
Swanson on steroids. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
I love that. Oh my God, I love the show and I love Ron. But
Hmm.
yeah, so those are true. There's keto, there's low fat. I've also
Hmm.
heard other diets. What are some, maybe one or two, very briefly touching on them?
Yeah, so there's a couple other ones that there's the Whole 30 diet, which honestly, if somebody said I have to do a diet and I couldn't convince them not to, I would start them with Whole 30 because if anything, and I'm like really hesitant to say that because I'm like, please don't, no one do it. But the reason I say that is because it's based off of, really it doesn't eliminate foods as far as I know. And it's just it kind of it's more about portion control, which is very problematic in its own form because as we know, it's our body is should be deciding how much we eat, not a diet. But
Yeah.
it's a little bit more balanced and it does focus on nutrition in a broader sense. That's been really popular in recent years. And then, of course, there are the diets that are completely based off buying a certain, like Jenny Craig. Another one here is Nutrisystem, where you only eat the foods that this company produces. So they
Mm.
send the food to you
Wow.
breakfast, lunch,
Perfect.
and dinner. Yeah, highly processed. They're usually frozen or freeze dried. You kind of like add water, soups, smoothies, things like that, where they're not really teaching you anything about nutrition. It's just the expectation is you just eat what they give you and the promise. And it's usually the food is measured out to be a certain amount of calories, and the promise is weight loss.
Mm.
Um, Supplements are a really big one. Skinny teas, which essentially are laxatives. They're teas that are made with herbs that have a laxative effect. So but that's bulimia. Using laxatives for weight loss is bulimia. So that's a way that I get really frustrated with diet culture is they've normalized bulimia as a way to sell weight loss. Um, those are the ones that I see that are like especially problematic.
It's leading so much into disordered eating.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there are two different terms. There's one called eating disorders, and for our listeners out there, there's another term called disordered eating.
Yeah.
They sound very similar, they're quite different. So, eating disorder is a clinical term. There are symptoms, there are diagnoses. But
Hmm.
disordered eating is basically some patterned ways of eating that are happening on a regular basis that have the potential to turn dangerous, but they're not diagnosable as of now. And they can be using excessive laxatives, you can say
Hmm.
excessive supplements or emotional eating, all of those things that come in.
Yeah.
And all of these diets that you said, they're literally leading to disordered eating in some way or the other. And how
Hmm.
can we talk about a healthy relationship with food when the entire pattern is so unhealthy? It's
Yeah.
based on restriction, it's based on elimination, it's based on masses, volumes.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, as I said, we've normalized disordered eating through diet culture.
We absolutely have. And as you're
Hmm.
saying, like eventually, if disordered eating keeps on, it can turn into eating disorders in different ways. Not just bulimia, but also binge eating, anorexia,
Hmm.
different ways. And then it's very, very difficult. Of course, even with body image issues, as we are talking, there's a high correlation with depression, anxiety, substance
Yeah.
use disorders. So when we're talking about diet industry and all the lies that they've been feeding us, we're not just talking about your food, we're talking about your physical health, mental health, different intricate systems of the body, your brain, mind,
Hmm.
everything that comes into the picture. But
Yeah.
this is something that no one talks about. I mean, the
No.
people these days are coming up and talking about it, but the industries don't want you to know these things.
No. And the thing is that oftentimes it's the industries that don't want us to know these things that have the budget to drown out all of the other voices, right? In their marketing because they're making most of the money. So they have the marketing budget to put out the
True.
messaging everywhere you go. I mean, truly, I can't go on my phone for 5 minutes without getting an email, a marketing email from a diet. Going on social media, several, if it's not a specific ad, it's an influencer promoting a diet. I get on the freeway and I pass billboards for, plastic surgeons and, you know, other diet related things, supplements. It's everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere. And it takes so much discernment from the consumer to like hear through the noise and seek out information that does not promote a disordered approach to food. And the amount of legwork that the average consumer has to do that, I feel is super wrong. It shouldn't be that hard. But
Yeah.
that's why I think having
Please.
podcasts like this and talking about it in a public way is so important, because
Yeah.
something to sort of break the other noise.
Yeah. As a
Mhm.
disclaimer, this conversation is not a replacement for a professional, even though Emily is a professional. As a nutritionist, I am a mental health professional, and yet everyone is unique. So, anyone
Mhm.
listening, if you're currently on any diet as of now, just don't give up suddenly, because that might again put your body in a state of shock. Please do refer to a professional and start having these conversations about deprivation. How do you enjoy your food? All of those things. But do not cut
Mhm.
it out cold turkey. We do not want that.
Yeah, and also too, I think it's important to know that for so many of us, our relationship to food stems from significant trauma. And sometimes we need therapy in addition to working with a nutrition professional to really get to the heart of our relationship to food in our bodies. There have been times when I've told people, I think therapy is going to be a better start for you. Let's get you going in therapy. Let's, why not process some of these things that have happened to you that have caused you to be here, and then we can start working together and integrate that into your lifestyle as it is currently. um, I think it's a green whenever you're working with anybody, because this thing, just like we have to sift through information on wellness, we also have to sift through practitioners. And I think, I'd love to talk a little bit about the difference between
Mhm.
like the terms of nutritionist, health coach, all of those things, and what the consumer should look for in those in them, because I think that it's really easy to get caught up with people that may not necessarily have your best interest at heart at worst, and at best they're well intentioned, but they don't have the education or the experience behind them to really support you in healing your relationship to food, because they themselves might still be caught up in the diet culture sort of way of doing things. So
Let's
yeah.
just get into that. Yeah. So, what is
Yeah.
the difference between these different professionals, and which one should one go to?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. And I'll first start by saying that in the United States, the
Mhm.
term health coach, the term nutritionist has no legal backing. So basically, what that means is anybody can go out there and tell people that they are a nutritionist or they are a health coach, and
Okay.
they will not get in trouble for not having met a certain educational standard. Like, they are legally allowed to say that. I can't go out there and say that I'm a doctor. That's illegal because I'm not a doctor, right? It's not the same with coaches and nutritionists. So that's not to say that people that call themselves coaches and nutritionists are always uneducated. That's not the case at all. But it just means that
That.
we have to, yeah, it just means that, when people use those terms, we have to ask them questions, right, about their background. So, like, as an example, and I'm just one example, right, is I refer to myself as a nutritionist and a health coach. I have a my education and my professional background is in clinical nutrition. So I went to school for dietetic technology, and I was certified at the time by the American Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. So they set certain standards for
Mhm.
education that you have to meet. I did interning hours. I took a license exam at the time. So I have a professional background in those things, right? Now, I call myself a nutritionist because I meet those standards. That's just my own personal, definition of that. And then I also became a health coach, and I went to an ICF accredited school, ICF being the International Coaching Federation. They also have certain standards for education and curriculum, right? Now, and I'm not trying to put myself on some high platform or anything like that, but as an example, somebody can read one book on nutrition and then call themselves a nutritionist, right? So on paper, without looking into that background, we might look like, if we don't know that the term nutritionist doesn't have a legal backing, it's going to make it really hard to discern. It's not just a matter of education level, but does this person have the experience specific to my needs and what I'm looking for, right?
Hmm.
Not everybody that markets themselves as a nutritionist is going to be able to help you heal your relationship to food. That might not be their deal. Same with health
Mhm.
coaches, you know.
Yeah.
Another example is that a lot of multi-level marketing companies, right? I think they're more harshly called pyramid schemes. I don't know
Mm.
if you have those in India. In America, they're very popular. And a lot of
Yeah.
them sell things like supplements and diet plans, and they will call their representatives that they bring on health coaches just because they're selling a supplement.
Yeah,
right?
because there's yeah.
Yeah. So this is why it's really important to like when you're looking for a health professional is to like find out what their background is and see if it makes sense for you, right? Like as an example, like if you were to dig into my background and you're interested in being given a meal plan that's keto, I'm not your person, you know. Someone else is for you if that's what you're looking for, right? Um, so it's just I think that sometimes it can be really confusing because there are so many people that are marketing themselves as like nutritionists and health coaches, but they can have a very like super varied amount of, you know, credentialing behind them and education behind them.
Yeah, something that I'd like to do is also research into the Indian standards of it because I'm not really
Hmm.
sure. But
Yeah.
this does give me an idea. That was very, very helpful. So, Emily, in general, I want to talk more about that, but because of our differences in terms of the countries that we're in. So,
Mm.
probably I can bring in some other researches and link it in the show notes. In India, what are the regulations and what type of person to look out for? But
Yeah,
I just
definitely.
from the name of it, I see a lot of new people coming in with the title of nutritionist and not dietitian. So I guess
Yeah.
that also has something to do with the shift.
Yes. So that was going to be the next example, right? So when dietitian does have legal backing. So somebody cannot legally call them in the United States anyway. They cannot legally call themselves a dietitian unless they have gone through that education and that licensure with the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. So that means that they would have done a 9-month internship. They would have gone to school and received at least a bachelor's degree, if not a master's degree. So that would be if you see dietitian, you know that they have that level of education. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are an intuitive eating a dietitian or
Mhm.
have that model, but it does there is like a legal implication to calling yourself a dietitian if you're not a dietitian.
Yeah.
Another one is a
Like this,
dietetic.
there are dietitians, so they're actually employed and they have done studies in that.
Yeah, I mean they could be self-employed as well. A lot of them will also call themselves health coaches. They would have also got a coaching certification. So there's a lot of layering that happens in this field as well. Um, and then another one is like dietetic technician, which is, it's a similar pathway to dietitian. If you were in a clinical setting, it would be like the same relationship to a patient that a nurse has as opposed to a doctor,
Mhm.
right? So there's like the counseling involved, the sharing, education. Dietetic technicians, they're trained in nutrition and they are nutritionists,
Mhm.
and they're trained in like counseling and working with that, closely with people in a clinical setting. So are dietitians, but that's usually the role that diet techs fill in the clinical space. And a lot of them do end up doing community work and working privately as health coaches as well. That's sort of the path that I took. I'm no
Mhm.
longer licensed, mostly because I didn't feel the need to be, because I have the education and I wasn't interested in working in a clinical setting. I'd done that
Yeah.
already. And I just wanted to, I got my health coaching certification and I leaned into that. But I do have that educational background and I did go through those processes to become licensed at the time. But,
Mhm.
so when you see dietetic technician or registered dietitian, that's a really good sign that somebody has had an adequate amount of education around nutrition. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're best health coaches, because sometimes coaching is its
Yeah.
own skill in and of itself, and it also doesn't mean that they necessarily will be well educated in your unique needs. There's people that specialize in things like people who have celiac disease, who can't eat gluten,
Yeah.
certain hormonal disorders. There's so many different things that different nutritionists, dietitians, diet techs can specialize in. So as a consumer, when you're looking for someone to support you, it's really important to ask, what am I looking for? Like, what are my unique needs? Because you want to find somebody that, has experience.
Got it. Yeah. Hmm. I hear what you're saying, and now there are lots of more questions about general diet and different things. But right now, I want to get a little personal here, if you're comfortable doing that, and ask you about
Yeah.
your journey. You have mentioned that you
Mhm.
have tried almost all the diets, keto, low
Yeah.
fat. So, just your journey that has been with food, your relationship with it.
I can definitely share about that. So I've had a long history of disordered eating. Although I was never diagnosed with an eating disorder, I think that doesn't have to, I think that's more because I was never put in a position to be diagnosed. I think I met the criteria in most cases, especially as a teenager, to be diagnosed
Mhm.
with, different eating disorders. I've had a really poor relationship with my body, especially as a teenager. When I hit puberty and I started to gain weight, that was a
Mhm.
really tough time. And of course, this was in the early 2000s, which was a very dark time for anybody who was, more than a size 2. It was, it's still bad, and it was so bad back then.
Mhm.
There was very little representation of different body sizes in the media. Um, and, this was a time when we were watching America's Next Top Model, and
Okay.
we were listening to Tyra Banks tell women who were 5'10" and 120 pounds that they were plus size, right? So it was
Mhm.
a very dark time. I had a really rough time in that, and I did develop a lot of eating disorders. But my love of food was always there, and it's interesting because, like, even though I was suffering so much and I, was essentially starving myself, I I used to think in the back of my mind, I just want to eat like a normal person, which is funny because the norm is disordered. But in my mind, I was like, I just want to that was my way of thinking. Like, I just want to have a good relationship with food. And that's what inspired me to study nutrition in school. So I went to school and I studied dietetic technology, and I learned about how to prepare food. I took a lot of culinary classes. I learned about how foods actually chemically interact in our bodies and why we need them. And it was incredibly healing for me. So this was in my late teens, early 20s. And I became extremely passionate about food. I also started to study like the food system and how it works and how broken the American food system is, which is
Mhm.
I won't go down that rabbit hole because that's like a whole nother thing. But I just became really passionate about food. But I was still, kind of healing my own stuff. And I didn't fall into like eating disorder territory again since I had been educated in nutrition, but I was still in some, light disordered eating diet stuff. I did a lot of like the ketogenic diet through my 20s. And it was actually on my 30th birthday. I'll remember this day for the rest of my life. It was on the eve of my 30th birthday. So I was 29 years old, and I was journaling. It was 11:30 p.m. So I was like waiting until midnight because I was like, I want to see the entry point into my 30th birthday. And I decided that I was going to give myself the gift of never going on another diet again. And that's
Mhm.
what I did. So it's, my evolution into this has been slow, and even my how I portray myself and even the education I give my clients has evolved, especially, but it's really been in like the last 3 to 4 years that I've like really seen the value and really have implemented like gentle nutrition into my own life, intuitive eating into my own life, and have like really honed that in as far as like what I provide my clients as well. So it's been a long journey to get here.
Mhm.
And yeah, I had to participate in what I'm fighting against for a little while.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
sometimes we help because we know what helplessness feels like a lot of
exactly.
time.
Yeah. And a huge motivator for me too is to if I can set up another generation of women to heal their relationship to food so that their daughters and their sons get to witness their parents have a healthy relationship to food and stop that
Mhm.
cycle that
Yeah.
exists right now, like that is a huge motivator for me because speaking as a child who suffered with huge issues with my body, and at 9 years old, I was thinking about dieting. I think I was 9 years old when I went on my first diet and was restricting myself. And, I struggled with binge eating, emotional eating. I had, there were other things going on in my life as a child that really fueled that as well. But that to me is like the kids that suffer from this, that's like kind of like the heart of it for me. That's like my why, you know? Yeah. Because they grow up and they kind of they continue doing it. And so much of the work that I do with clients, they talk to me about, how this developed for them. And from the unfortunate thing is like for most people, it started in childhood.
So,
Mhm.
God, I hear that, how difficult it must be for you. And everyone out there who at such a young age, 9, 10, 8, when we
Yeah.
don't even know who we are exactly, what the world is, and we're starting to look at our bodies differently.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and it's interesting because I feel like kids, they go through so many, and I'm not an expert in hormonal changes that kids go through at all. I'm speaking just kind of, based on my own experience, but the hormonal changes that happen, right? Like all throughout childhood and like those key stages of development that, are the weight will fluctuate naturally sometimes. And I think that there
Yeah,
can be such if we see children, gain weight, there can be such an overcorrection that happens, right, from the elders in their lives,
absolutely.
and that's when I think it's really easy to double down on like removing that child from their own intuitive hunger and fullness cues out of fear
Mhm.
that that child's cues are off somehow, right? And I sometimes think like I wonder if more kids were just left alone to their own devices and given just a little bit of healthy guidance, right? Like really positive oriented guidance on like the value of food and the value of different types of food and variety, like it would sort itself out, right?
It
Like their
would.
bodies would land at the weight that they're meant to be at.
I cannot help but mention how, even when we talk about hunger cues at this point in children,
Mhm.
Emily, imagine the kids being handed iPads at the age of 2, 3.
Mhm.
There is no internal focus. Like it's taken away a lot. I see kids in my family, extended family. They're
Yeah.
looking at the TV, they're gulping down food, not even chewing the food.
No.
The generation, the upcoming generation, there's so much more work that needs to be done to develop that healthy relationship with food that goes beyond just modeling is very important. At the same time, the kind of lifestyle, the kind of social setting that you provide to kids is also very, very important.
Yeah. And it's so tough too, right? Because I think you're tapping into the importance of being mindful while we eat, right? And learning to be present with the food and not be distracted with television or something else. And the really challenging thing about that is that economically, most of us don't have the luxury of a
Mhm.
single income household where they can have dinner around the table every night.
Mhm.
A lot of people are having to work more than one job to support their family, even if it's more than one person bringing in the income. You know, in days gone by, when we had more stable economies, like one person would go to work, bring home the bacon,
Yeah,
so to speak, and the family could eat together. But now
yeah,
parents are so busy with work that it's so challenging for that structure around mealtime, which can be such a healthy way to go about, teaching your children how to exist with food. It's just not as
agreed,
accessible anymore. And
agreed.
that's the challenge, And I think a lot of children learn how to eat from schools and from educators, actually. And
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, too, for a lot of American kids, their lunchtime meal that's provided them by the school is the only full meal that they can get, right? Depending on, different socioeconomic levels and things like that. So, again, there's like so many levels to this that can impact our ability to take in nutrition. And I think a big, as nutritionists that promote intuitive eating, I think it's really important for us to remember that intuitive eating and the ability to choose our food and eat when we're hungry is also a socioeconomic luxury that's not granted to everybody, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
it is a privilege.
it is a privilege, and dieting is also a privilege. I talk about that too. It's
Mm,
we're in a if like it's a privilege to be in a position where we are focusing on what we shouldn't be eating to lose weight. When there are people that are just, they need to eat whatever food comes across their way in order to
mhm,
survive because it's so scarce, right? So I think it's
mhm.
like there's so many different ways to like look at this. And I think acknowledging that food is not a privilege that's granted to most people in the world is really important as well.
Yeah, as we're
Mhm.
talking about this, for the people who do behold that privilege, this conversation is focused on how can you make the best out of that privilege in terms
Exactly.
that what's best for your body, your mind, and if you believe it, then soul as well.
Mhm.
And I'm also, your story that you mentioned. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
It's to be on a public platform and to share that intimate part of your life. I'm really grateful that you were able to trust this space that much. And in fact, it's again and again we're coming, it's not the nutrition, it's just the outer appearance in all of these things, the
Exactly.
way, the physical body. You
Hmm.
would talk because you're talking about the American experience here. I will mention one or two studies in India as well, which have been done. And so one is from the National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences. We call it NIMHANS in Bangalore. They reported that 60% of Indian women are dissatisfied with their body weight. And this is a 2015 study. So it
Yeah.
goes a little back. There's another one done in 2019. The personal hygiene company called Dove. So even they did a survey in India, and they said that 76% of Indian women who were surveyed reported that they feel the pressure to conform to certain beauty standards, like they're not
Yeah.
satisfied with their physical appearance.
Hmm.
Those numbers are really shocking.
Yeah.
We're talking mostly all women. And of course,
Hmm.
in this, we haven't focused on the intensity. So maybe there are more women who are in the lower intensity, moderate, severe. But almost
Absolutely.
every woman that I've met in my life, for sure, they have mentioned their weight, their insecurity at some point in their life.
Hmm. Yeah. It's
It's
it's the norm, and that's
it's
what's so heartbreaking about it.
it's the norm, yeah. I am
Yeah.
actually, very happy that we're doing this on a public platform, Emily, because beauty standards, it's a social concept, it's a social construct. So if the social construct can be made with people, then it can also be start to we can also start to demolish it socially. And that is
Yes.
what we're doing, women
Yeah.
coming together, talking about these things, their personal experiences, what has affected them, what has helped them, and actually
Hmm.
forming a community around it. That is
Uh-huh.
very, very helpful.
Yeah.
And because I always say that when we work in body image issues, one-on-one work in therapy is great. One-on-one work with nutritionists are great. At the same time, it's also so much social that I encourage them to take group therapies or in different ways at different stages in our work. Very,
Hmm.
very important.
Yes, absolutely. I think community building is huge, especially with other women who are, wanting to heal their relationships to food in their bodies in the same way that you do, because
Mhm.
it's true. The all of the other noise is so loud that we really have to flood our immediate environment with things that support our healing process. I talk about this
Mhm.
a lot. Like, I think one of the best ways we can do this is to be really vicious about our social media feeds and how we unfollow and mute people.
Yes.
And it's
Yes.
not just influencers and, diet like accounts that might be promoting things that we're trying to move away from. But, if sometimes it can be also muting friends and family members who are tracking their weight loss journey online. If that's triggering to you, you know,
Mm-hmm.
kind of being like cutthroat a little bit about that stuff. And it doesn't mean you have to stop being friends with people. It's not isolation, I don't think is ever the solution, but just being very discerning about the information that we take in, and I
Very
think
important.
especially if you care about health and you do want to access health information, because there are influencers, there are nutritionists and wellness experts in the online space, on Instagram, on TikTok, that are promoting really, really wonderful ways to heal our relationship to
Mm-hmm.
food. And you can find them. And, you know, all the issues that social media brings to our lives, we can let the algorithm work in our favor as well, right? So,
You absolutely can. Very, very
yeah.
important. And it's social
Hmm.
media is one thing that I let my clients know the first time as well, like initial sessions. That just
Hmm.
look into your feed. What kind of
Hmm.
algorithm is established? What kind of people you follow? And start
Yeah.
following different kind of people who actually help you at this point. It's
Hmm.
we think that it's mind over matter and all, but it's it's so impactful. We cannot negate the experience of that. And
Totally.
even when it comes to the societal pressure, at least in the Indian context, the concept of boundaries is very new. It's, I
Yeah.
would say, it's at the surface level, starting to trickle down as we're a collectivistic culture. It is really almost sometimes impossible to say no or draw boundaries with our relatives who are
Mm,
body shaming, all of that.
yeah.
So even in therapy, a lot of work is focused on how to protect yourself from these people,
Yeah.
how to develop that capacity, or to
Hmm.
just avoid them at some points. The last is
Yeah.
like just avoid them. It's really sad that you have to avoid your family, but you have to
Yeah.
protect yourself as well. That's
And
there.
it is so hard. And for so many of us, our families can be some of the most damaging sources to our self-esteem
Mm-hmm.
and to our body image. And it's really hard to set those boundaries because we are tribal creatures by nature. It kind of goes against our nature to set
Mm-hmm.
limits with our core family that we've grown up with. And that's why I think that kind of like if it's not always possible or feasible to draw hard boundaries with certain family members, we can counteract their voices by building communities outside of our family that do support us.
Yeah.
And there's always ways to sort of support ourselves despite the family unit that we fall into, right?
True. I'm really grateful for the set of friends I have, the set of family I have
Yeah.
who support me that way. And
Hmm.
on that line, I remember that we were talking about this aspect that we eat food, we feel, so we eat so-called healthy food, then we feel deprived. So we start snacking on the so-called unhealthy or junk, then we feel guilt, shame.
Hmm.
So when you talk about the diet cycle, is that what you mean?
Yeah, so the diet cycle is essentially, that's definitely a part of it, right? So the diet cycle is made mobile with shame. Basically,
Mm-hmm.
it's motivated with shame. So essentially, if we were to start like the first day someone decides to go on a diet, right? Let's just call it their first diet, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they are a child and they're being body shamed by their peers, or maybe the adults in their life, or they simply saw an ad of what an ideal body is supposed to look like, made a comparison and decided that they needed to fix themselves. I put that in quotes, right? So they go on a diet, they restrict themselves. Usually the first time, and I'm gonna, I don't know about this necessarily happens with kids all the time, but when an adult diets for the first time or an adolescent, they usually lose a lot of weight because the body
Mm-hmm.
has not yet adapted to it
Yeah.
being starved in any kind of way. It like takes the body off guard. It takes our metabolisms off guard, right? So we
Okay.
lose a lot of weight. And that weight loss, especially if if you wanted that weight loss, it is elating. Most people find it very like happy making, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
a very
Yeah.
positive thing. That was my experience, and maybe it might be beneficial to put a trigger warning before this episode for people, just because,
Mm-hmm.
when I was a teenager, I essentially stopped eating. I survived off fat-free frozen yogurt and sugar-free energy drinks and plain bagels, like very limited, and I lost a ton of weight. Like I lost 50 pounds in between my sophomore and junior year of high school. I went back to school and I was getting asked out on dates. I got a lot of positive feedback for my eating disorder, essentially. And
That's
even from
it is
teachers, even
very
from educators, right? Yeah, I was like praised for my willpower. That's the thing is like it's a lot of the times disordered eating is reinforced, right? By,
exactly, Emily. It is so
Mhm.
much. No one cares to ask, is this weight
Yeah,
loss healthy?
right.
In fact, I was meeting with a bunch of girls, I mean, bunch of friends I made a while back, and we were meeting after a year or so. And one of the friends asked the other one, oh, not even asked that, oh, you've lost so much weight. Oh, how did you do it? And I generally am a person who doesn't like to comment on weight in the first
Hmm.
place, be it gain, reduction, whatever, or physical features. But because it brought in, I checked in like, is this weight loss healthy? And then the
Hmm.
friend said, not at all. She is sick.
Right.
But no one even starts to ask that question.
No, no. Yeah, this false idea that weight loss is always a sign of health and weight gain is always a sign of lack of health. But we know that for people who are recovering from an eating disorder, weight gain can be a very positive sign for health, right? So,
Mhm.
you know, kind of like back on to the diet cycle, right? So they lose a lot of weight, and then inevitably, those deprivation signals, that deprivation state that the body's in, causes us,
Mhm.
we get off the diet, we stop being so extreme. I will say for me, I'm talking about something a little bit extreme as an eating disorder. I actually made a conscious choice to like not do that anymore, right? So I
Mhm.
just started to eat a little bit more food and I eventually built myself up to eating like an adequate lifestyle. But because my body's metabolism had been like made worse because of what I was doing, because of the starvation I
Yeah.
had, just starting to eat normally again, I gained back I gained back a lot of weight over the course of a few years, right? And so I went on another diet, as we do. So I go on another diet, restrict myself more. Those deprivation signals kick back in. I end up binge eating, gaining back all the weight and then some. The shame, the feeling of failure kicks in. What's the solution to that? Another diet. And the thing is every time we do another diet, our metabolisms go through something called metabolic adaptation. So basically, we have a set point in our weight that our bodies like to maintain at any given time. If there's a risk of us falling below that set point weight, our metabolism adapts by burning fewer calories for fuel so that it can store more calories for fuel in the form of body fat. It just burns less. So every time we diet, we're actually lowering our metabolisms even more. So as you can imagine, someone on the diet cycle, right? And a lot of the times we're trying to chase the impact that that first diet gave us. Well, I did this one diet and I lost all this weight, so I just need to find something that works just like that. But the thing is we only lost that much weight because we took the metabolism off guard and it hadn't adapted yet to starvation, right? So every time we diet, we are wrecking our metabolisms a little bit more, and we're also causing our bodies to go into a state where our hunger hormones are increased. So our body's telling us to eat more, and the hormones that tell us that we're satiated decrease. So not only are we hungry more often, we're satiated with less food, and we're burning less calories for fuel. So as you can see how this would spiral negatively for a lot of people, right? But because we only know the solution to be another diet, we continue to do it over and over again. And every time we go around this cycle, we're triggered with more shame. And it can be such an aggravating and frustrating and self-defeating process because people who are struggling to lose weight don't understand why it's so hard because they try so hard. And they often are limiting their calories so much and over-exercising so much. And yet they still continuously gain all the weight back from every diet they do. 96% of people have this experience. So this is why, you know, when people are saying like, what's the point of, working with somebody who follows an intuitive eating model if they're not going to promise weight loss? It's because, in my opinion, it's the only way to go. Because dieting
It's the
statistically
only
causes the
way.
very thing it claims to solve.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It seems like
Hmm.
intuitive eating is one of the only healthy ways to go about it. You
Yeah.
know that you're not leaving any long-term impacts or damaging your internal systems as you go on doing that.
Yeah, because you know that the increase and decrease in weight, going up and down in weight, is actually associated with heart disease and diabetes. So, regardless of like, uh, it's worse to just go up and down like that than it is to just stay a stable weight, which we can, within a certain range, which we really can only achieve if we're not dieting anymore.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it might mean that we're never going to get to the size that we had always wanted to ourselves by not dieting, but we can stop yo-yoing in our weight, which is definitely beneficial for our health.
I see that. I see
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you've already started. I see from the starting itself, we've been touching on intuitive eating here and there. So let's
Hmm.
just get specifically into that, talking about what it is, how do we go about it, and
Yeah.
how much can the listeners start to do by themselves, and how much should be done with a professional.
Yeah, that's a great question. So intuitive eating is a protocol for healing the relationship to food. So that's like the official protocol is intuitive eating, but that doesn't mean you have to go through that protocol necessarily to benefit from the practices that it teaches. If you want to go through the protocol, you can certainly work with a practitioner, but you can also do it on your own. There's the intuitive eating workbook that guides you through that process, which is great because it's an affordable option for most people to simply buy a workbook if working with a practitioner is not in their best interest. I would say, again, if you have trauma, like significant trauma related to your relationship with food, working with a therapist in addition to doing that would be helpful. But essentially, it consists of 10 different pillars or steps. So, the two biggest ones that we see out in the world the most, like what people when people talk about intuitive eating, they usually know about these two pillars, and that's honoring our hunger and feeling our fullness. Eating when we're hungry and stopping when we're satiated. And in order to do that, we really have to get back into the body. And the only way that we can actually do that is if we have eliminated dieting we just have like completely discredited diet culture. And that's a pillar in and of itself too, is just realizing that dieting doesn't work. We have to come to terms with the fact that dieting has not served us. Until we do that, we can't really go down the intuitive eating model, because we're going to be seeing it as another diet. We're going to be
Yeah.
approaching it as a diet. Um, Another big factor of it is gentle nutrition. So it's not about, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about intuitive eating, that it's about giving up on health and you just eat whatever you want all the time, right? Because all foods are allowed, right?
It's not
Yeah,
like that. It would just end up being another extreme of the continuum.
exactly. The way I like to describe intuitive eating is, I like to ask myself, what is the most satisfying way I can meet my body's nutritional needs right now, right?
Hmm.
So, gentle nutrition says that, we need protein, we need healthy fats, and we need carbohydrates and fiber to feel fueled. We need to have
Hmm.
micronutrients from vegetables and fruits and spices and things like that. And we get to choose to nourish our bodies using just those gentle concepts of, making sure that we have all of these elements in play most of the time, while simultaneously we're not demonizing foods that, we eat purely for the pleasure of it. Because if we have to allow ourselves to eat for pleasure and to feel satisfied, and however we can, because that's what keeps us from those extremes that keep, as I said, like when we're in those extremes, that's when we binge, and that's when we emotionally eat, so kind of like encapsulating all of that into one, you know cute little package. What's the most satisfying way that I can meet my nutritional needs? And sometimes it's about deciding, I'm not going to meet any nutritional needs right now. I just want some ice cream. And that's okay too, right? So it really is, all foods have to be on the table. We have to stop labeling foods as good foods and bad foods. All foods exist on a spectrum of nutrition, and they have different components to them that serve the body in different ways. It's not as binary as good and bad. And just living in that gray area that exists in between being, because most people who diet, even if they're not technically on a diet, they're still caught up in that diet mentality, and they're usually in the other side of the extreme, where they are, you know overcompensating for the deprivation that they were experiencing on the diet, and they're binging a lot and completely negating their health altogether. So that's why dieting can be so bad, because it keeps us in these extremes. Whereas gentle nutrition is that sweet spot in the middle, where we honor our cravings while simultaneously honor the nutritional needs of our body.
That sounds quite simple.
It does, right? Not always easy, because there's so much we have to unlearn, and there's so much psychology that goes into allowing ourselves to take those steps. And it's funny that you said simple, because I think as human beings, we tend to reject things that feel too simple. It's like, if it
That's
feels too simple,
that is
I know,
exactly.
yeah, like our unique relationship to food and our issues with our weight feels complex. So when you have someone being like, just honor your fullness, all foods are allowed, it's all good, it can almost feel like, what do you mean? Like, like, how dare you even suggest that, right? And this is why diets can be so kind of captivating, because they'll be like, the reason that you're X amount of pounds is because you're eating proteins at this time of day when you're actually only supposed, and it
Yeah,
gets,
there's so much complication, layers to it. The
yeah,
documentaries, they'll be talking about these different macronutrients, numbers and grams, and
yeah,
like, okay, they know what they're talking about because it's so complicated that I can't understand it. But now
yeah.
that I'm hearing you, it can be sometimes like, is it that simple? Is it even true? Is it even right? I mean, is it supposed to be that simple?
Well, I mean, let's go back to what we were talking about our dogs earlier, right? They're not looking at a
Yeah.
textbook trying to figure out what they're supposed to eat. They just naturally know when it's time to eat and when they're done eating. Like, they're not given options in their food like they would if they were wild. Like we give them their kibble or whatever their dog food is. But, it's that It really is so much more about an unlearning because honestly, the tried and true knowledge that we have about nutrition is quite simple. And there's a whole nother thing we could dive into about nutritional studies is that there are a lot of diets that are like backed by research, backed by science, but you'll
Mhm.
see that the research is being done by, it's not being done by an unbiased third party.
Yes.
And it's usually on a very small, research group. So it's very challenging to make, like a grand. So that's the thing too is like, but they'll call it a study and they might even be published in journals. And, as you know, like there's some journals that are more reputable than others. So it's so hard as a consumer to like know, okay, well, is their research like, worth looking into or is it, it's so challenging. And honestly, even as a nutrition professional, it's hard for me sometimes to sift through. So I can't,
Mhm.
it's really hard. So that's why I just think like the gentle nutrition approach, where it's just like, hey, we just need to eat a healthy amount of varied foods. You know, it's more manageable for most people. I think it's more about learning how to trust ourselves more than anything. I think skepticism that we might have about going down a gentle nutrition, intuitive eating approach is not so much that we don't trust the process, is that we don't trust ourselves to be able to do the process, right?
Mhm.
We don't know how to exist with food outside of a diet, so we don't trust it, you know?
In such situations, something that has helped me really like a lot is getting deep diving into Ayurveda, which is one of the ancient Indian modalities of healing
Mm-hmm.
and therapy. It has a very it does give frameworks like this is one body type, that is one. But even within that, there's so much flexibility, combinations,
Yeah.
permutations that you can go through. And it's not restrictive. It tells you what works with the body, and they say eat it and
Mm-hmm.
experience it.
Yeah.
Experiment with this kind of sleep schedule, experiment with
Mm-hmm.
these kind of foods,
Yeah.
experiment with all the different things.
Yeah.
That has really helped me. Because
Yeah.
even when we're talking about fats, Emily, I noticed that they come up, but there are not like long-term longitudinal studies that are done on the impact of it.
No.
So after a couple of years, we're like, oh shit, people are developing the X symptoms, Y symptoms because of that.
Yeah, exactly.
Till the time that people are affected by it already. But when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
things like philosophies or disciplines rather like Ayurveda, they've been here for hundreds and thousands of years. And I
Mm-hmm.
can see how much my relationship with food is has changed as I got more into that intuitive eating. And somehow, even without knowing the term intuitive eating, I got into it using Ayurveda.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually I've dabbled in Ayurveda too. So I really appreciate how, cuz the person that I worked with, she really made a point like I'm not telling you to only eat these foods. I'm just saying that these might be foods that help you to feel really nourished. And she also told me to write a list of what she called like yum foods. So as I'm
Mhm.
eating, which is such a wonderful intuitive eating approach, is like keep an ongoing list of meals that when you eat them, you feel really good afterwards. You feel satiated,
Yes.
you feel like you enjoyed your food and it felt like it gave you energy. Like that is such a valuable tool. So, yeah, I'm not an expert in Ayurveda at all, but my
Mhm.
limited experience with it, like on a personal level, I thought it was, really really wonderful in that way. So,
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I'd love to pick your brain on it more. Maybe another day.
I love to know that about it. I am also not a professional. I just like to self-read becon books.
Hmm.
But yeah. So
Yeah.
for now, Emily, what are some starter tips that you'd like to give to our listeners when it comes to intuitive eating?
Oh, yeah, that's so good. So I really like to talk about the importance of getting back into the body more
Mhm.
often because when we're in the body, we increase what's called interoceptive awareness, which is basically our ability to know the sensations that the body is experiencing, right?
Mhm.
Because as I said, we live very like head up. We're very in our heads. We don't usually like when we're super fast paced and we're not checking in, it can be really easy to go through the whole day without even really tapping into how we're feeling in our body. And we can't eat intuitively until we're tapped in. So
Mhm.
one really simple way I think we can do this is just by taking a couple minutes to do some deep breathing before we eat. like ground ourselves in the experience of eating, focus on the food, practicing just mindful eating in a general sense, right? Turning off the television,
Yeah.
turning off our phones or putting them away, and just focusing on the food in front of us. And, taking a few minutes to breathe so we're tapped into the body. We're in a state of, we're in that rest and digest state of the nervous system. We're putting aside everything else of the day and we're just focusing on our food, asking ourselves, is this satisfying? Does this taste good to me? How do I feel about the temperature, the texture, the taste of this food,
Mhm.
right? And kind of another thing is we can stop halfway through our meal and ask ourselves, like, where do I fall on the fullness scale? How full am I right now? How satiated am I? Do I need to eat more food? you know Seeing if we can get to that sweet spot where we feel satisfied and we feel full, like our belly feels full, but we're not stuffed, we're not feeling like we need to take a nap. And really, it's so much easier to do these things when we're grounded in the experience of eating versus just eating in front of the TV or thinking too much about things outside of the meal. So that would be like my first suggestion, because it's a good entry point, because it gets people to consider that there is a part of this that involves getting into the body again. And
Yeah.
that
Maybe.
alone can be life changing for somebody's relationship to food.
It could be, I'm sure. I guess I need to do an episode on how to get inside one's body, because in
Mm.
every episode something like this is coming up, like get
Oh,
into your
interesting.
body, get into your body.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I will do more of that, and a mini version of that breathing that I do. Like for a lot of beginners, it might sound like,
Hmm.
oh my God, breathing before a meeting. What do
Yeah.
I do? That what the that? So very tiny is that what I do. Yeah, I don't even have to close my eyes or join my hands. I just say like a tiny sentence in my mind that thank you to the hands that prepared this food and brought
Yes.
this food to my plate today. That's it.
Yeah. Yes.
So in a way, it takes what 5 to 7 seconds, and yet I'm bringing awareness into
Hmm.
my body and
Yeah.
into the food that I'm going to eat.
Yeah. I love that too, because we also tap into a state of gratitude before we eat, right? And just, feeling like a sense of abundance with our ability to eat that meal. It's so important. I also think too, when we do things like that, when we acknowledge the food for what it is and the gift that it is, we expand our relationship to food to be more about just like, how do I, it's like, I think we often see food as like something to figure out, right? Something to,
Mhm.
like, how do I eat in such a way where I get this specific outcome, when really, like,
Mhm.
the relationship to food can be so much more, like, have so much more depth than that, right? you know like, there's, as an example, like, there's nothing I love more than just like meandering through a farmer's market and like connecting with the people who
I
grow our
love that.
food. Yeah, and like, really just seeing the variety of food and learning about different ingredients and learning how to cook. And these are the things I think that this is such a like fulfilling, like life-giving practice, to have
Mhm.
this like full relationship to food, that we deny ourselves when we only think of food as to how do I eat less of it in order to lose weight. We miss out on so much, So I
So
love I love just taking that moment for gratitude before you eat. Yeah. Yeah.
any other tip that you'd like to give?
Let's see. Honestly, learn how to cook. If you don't cook already, learn how to cook. And I think, again, like, you don't need to be a master chef
Mhm.
to cook yourself a delicious, nourishing meal that you feel good about. But again, when we cook our food, when we're present with the process of preparing a meal, we're adding an element of mindfulness to it. And we naturally are going to garner more respect for the finished product, and we're going to be more present with the meal when we eat it. And also, it's
Yeah.
it's a great self-education in basic nutrition, right? Because when we cook a meal and
Yes.
we're thinking, okay, like, what's my carbohydrate source going to be? What kind of protein do I want today? What veggies am I going to fill my plate with? It adds a creative element, and again, it just like expands that relationship to food to be something that can be a creative outlet and can be a practice in like mindfulness in and of itself. I I
Yeah.
I think it's so nice when you can learn how to prepare food for yourself, however that is.
It is, and we don't just eat through the mouth, we eat through all the senses. So when we cook,
Hmm.
we're actually nourishing all 5 senses.
Yes, absolutely. And then as one last tip, I would say, especially for people who struggle with emotional eating. We didn't really talk about that too much in this episode, but that's a huge thing that people struggle with. And really, I think that's way more to do with a lack of adaptive coping strategies than it is with like using food to cope with emotions. I always try to tell people like the biggest negative impact, in my opinion, of emotional eating is not that we're eating too much food or that we're binging on the wrong foods, but it's that we're not meeting a need that needs to be met that can't be met through
I
food.
agree. I
You know,
agree.
yeah. So
Yeah,
expanding our coping strategies, so like whatever that looks like having a community, like what we said, meditation, journaling, joyful exercise, spending time with friends, even binge watching Netflix, like whatever it is that helps you to feel soothed in your emotions so that you have a diverse menu of coping strategies. Because again, it's food is wonderful. It's an amazing thing to do and it can make us feel really, really good. And it's also not the best coping strategy for a lot of emotions that we might be trying to, soothe ourselves from.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
accurate, actually. There can be a separate episode just on emotional eating, but
Mm-hmm.
one state very important is that when it comes to emotional eating, eating is not the problem. Eating is actually an ineffective way to cope with something that's happening underneath it. And
Yes.
that is what we need to look at.
Yes.
Most of my clients, they represent this aversiveness or lack of ability to cope with the underlying emotion which gets them to eat or even eat
Mm-hmm.
sugar or go to other substances for that matter. So it's very important to deal with the underlying emotions, and for that, of course, therapy is very
Yes, yes,
important.
yes. Yes, therapy, yeah, it's a really big deal. And I do find that, when I've worked with people who struggle with emotional eating like you do, like they do tend to have a lack of, other coping strategies. And working with them to sort of develop those and implement them into their daily life is really effective for helping with
It's
the
great.
emotional eating.
Sure.
Yeah.
Ah, this has been such a wonderful conversations. I, for one, whenever I approach the end of these episodes, I'm like, oh my God, but I have 10 different questions to ask. I did not ask this. I want to know this. At the same time, I acknowledge that these episodes are an introductory conversation. We can learn, and of course, don't want to tap into every aspect. That is what us professionals are for. Hey, come on, give our fees, and then we'll talk about more. But this is a basic level of awareness and educational purpose that we're setting up here. And as we go on, of course, if anyone wants to reach out and dive deeper into what these concepts are, there are more books. There is Emily. There is I am there. We can talk more about it. But as of now, I am feeling we're at a good point in our conversation. So, as a last question, my favorite
Mhm.
question is that what is something about developing relationship with food, eating that I should be asking you, but I haven't yet?
Ooh, that's a good
It's
question.
important.
Yeah, I really do feel like we covered so much. And like you said, like everything that we touched on could be its own unique episode or several
Yeah.
episodes, and yeah, I think we touched on a lot of like really, really helpful things. I think, this might be another episode in and of itself, but also just the value of like the joy of movement, right? Like having a
Mhm.
healthy relationship to exercise is also a part of that, intuitive eating protocol, and just finding ways to move that feel good to us. And we're not doing it just for the sole purpose of weight loss or even muscle building, but because it feels good and because we're human beings and humans are designed to move, you know? Move like
I
children
agree.
do, right? I have to say, like little kids, they naturally move, but they don't feel the need to like wake up at 5 a.m. to go to a boot camp class that they absolutely hate. Like we don't need to do those
Yeah,
things either. Yeah. So
yeah.
yeah.
Huh. I am feeling very happy. I'm feeling very happy. I'm feeling quite light actually. Sometimes
Oh,
what
good.
happens is that we look at all of these professions out there and they must be sorted, they might be all okay. But when we actually start to talk, we've all had our histories, we all have our past, and we all
Hmm.
go through the similar experience. Even though we're professionals, doesn't mean it just completely excludes us from the experience we have as women. It's very helpful. And one of the intentions of being here talking about it is to create a sense of virtual community. It's not like we can meet every woman out there, but just to
Yeah.
be, say, like, we're on the same page with you. We have
Yeah.
had struggles in our own ways, and there is hope. Maybe this is the tiny light from the crack of the door that someone
Mm,
needs, and I would be happy even if it becomes that light for one person today. And I'm
yeah.
so glad that I get to do it with you, Emily. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I had so much fun. It was really lovely chatting to you about this. Um, I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, towards the end, I just like to, I know my listeners are maybe more of Indian population as of now, yet can you just tell the people who might be in the US or wherever what services you provide as of now, where can they approach you for that service, offer some
Mhm.
additional support, if that is okay with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do one-on-one coaching. So I have a few different packages that I offer. I'm sure if I can give you the link so that you can put it in the
Yeah,
notes for people if they're interested in that. I do work internationally, so I'm not limited to just the United States. Um,
that's perfect.
yeah, yeah. That's the benefit of, coaching is that,
Yeah.
it's we can do that. Um, I also have a podcast, so I have the Unstarved podcast where I do dive into, like smaller content, smaller bits of information and expand on them in different episodes. I just did a series on hunger and fullness, so, that would if people are interested in that, I expand on it quite a bit there. They can find me on Instagram. I sometimes post content there. Instagram is like posting content on Instagram is not my like most favorite thing. But the podcast I'm, very consistent with, but you can still find some content that I'm doing over there. Um, but yeah, that's kind of what I'm up to. I'm also in the process of creating some online courses that I'm excited about because I'll be able to offer support to people at a price point that is more affordable to more people,
Mhm.
and it be sort of like a self-guided thing. So that's going to be coming down the pipeline. I'm really excited about, creating those offerings for specific courses. One I'm working on right now is a binge eating course, how to overcome binge eating. So I'm looking forward to that.
Likewise. And you mentioned
Mhm.
the intuitive eating workbook. Where can people access that?
Yeah, I can I mean you can buy it most almost anywhere. In America I use Amazon like quite a bit. So I can also, give you the links for those specific books, but those are going to be really great resources for anybody who wants to go down this path as a
Yeah,
starting point for
I'll add
sure.
that into the notes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. I also
Perfect.
can also send you the resources for it's a health at every size. So basically it gives like really great gentle nutrition protocols for different health concerns that we might be dealing with that don't that we can do without the focus being weight loss. So it can be really helpful for people because especially in the medical setting, it's really, really common for people to sort of just be dismissed and be told that all of their medical issues have to do with their weight, when in fact that's not
Mhm.
actually true. So these are going to be really great protocols and like just helpful tips for people who are dealing with certain medical issues that go beyond just being told that they need to lose weight. So,
Mhm. I'd love that.
yeah.
I'd love that for myself and all the other people. I'll add the links. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Samia.
Perfect. Thank you for giving your time this morning. I hope you have a great day ahead.
Okay, you too. Thank you. Bye.